Yippee-ki-pee!
Hey, what's up guys? Today we'll be reviewing the set of cards revealed so far in Journey to Un'Goro. Without knowing the whole set, we don't have the full picture yet to fully analyze how the cards will fit in the big scheme of things, but we'll try to give it the best analysis based on what we know so far. Once the whole set is released, it will be a good chance to revisit these reviews and reassess some of the cards. First is Verdant Longneck for the Druid. The card is part of the new Adapt mechanic, which is like the Discover mechanic, but instead of discovering a card, you will be adding abilities. 10 different choices have been shown so far, and some seem to be more powerful than others, but it is the ability to adjust to the current board state that makes the Adapt mechanic super interesting. That being said, Verdant Longneck's stats seem too low for its mana cost. The card has the Beast tag, so it's obviously meant for a Beast Druid deck, but for 5 mana, the 5/4 stats seem weak even after you add the Adapt effects to it. Like if we add Stealth to it, we might as well use the Stranglethorn Tiger with 1 extra health. As a taunt, it is a crappy Booty Bay bodyguard. With +3, it is a 5 mana 8/4 which can die to most 4 mana minions, and with +1/+1, it is a 5 mana 6/5, weaker than the vanilla 5/6 Pit Fighter that sees no play. Will the flexibility be good enough to compensate for the low stats? If the upside is good enough, and we don't think it is for this card. Next is the Hunter legendary Swamp King Dred, which immediately attacks any minions your opponent plays. One aspect of Hearthstone that players have criticized before is the lack of interaction possible on the opponent's turn. Currently, the only form of interaction you can have is through secrets, so it is a nice design to add another way to actively react to your opponent's plays. A 9/9 body is a huge body for 7 mana, and it can take down several minions before it dies, even ones with stealth, but it does have some severe drawbacks. The keyword here is play, so any minions summoned from a spell or from other minions like our Jade friends will not be attacked. Also, with Poisonous being an adapt choice, the king can be easily killed by adapting your minion to have the Poisonous effect. It is also weak to some of the efficient removal spells like Shadow Word Death, Hex, Polymorph, Sap, or Deadly Shot. Finally, it only has an immediate effect on any future minions played, and not on the current minions on the board. For all these reasons, the king has too many drawbacks to claim his throne. The next card is Pyros, the Mage legendary. The card is a 2/2 for 2 mana that returns to your hand when it dies as a 6/6 for 6 mana, which in turn returns to your hand when it dies as a 10/10 for 10 mana. That is a ton of value packed into one card. The first thought that comes to mind when seeing this card is too slow. Playing a 6/6 for 6 mana and a 10/10 for 10 mana is just not efficient or impactful enough these days, especially when you can spawn bigger Jades for much less mana. But before completely discounting the card, there are a couple of aspects that might redeem it. Both 2/2 and 6/6 incarnations of the card have Death Rattle, so they will be brought back by N'Zoth, if N'Zoth Mage is a thing, and with Manic Soulcaster you can potentially cast N'Zoth multiple times in a game for a whole army of Pyros. Another important aspect of this card is the Elemental tag, and having already seen 2 Elemental related Mage cards in this set along with the existing very strong Water Elemental, there is a chance that Blizzard is pushing for an Elemental Mage archetype. If that deck is a thing, Pyros might fit nicely in it. Speaking of elementals, Blizzard has released more details about the elemental interaction. It sounds like the way elementals will work, they will give a bonus benefit to some cards if you play a certain number of elementals the last turn. To help us achieve that, the mage spell, Flame Geyser, does 2 damage for 2 mana and places a 1/2 elemental in your hand. With the rotation of both Arcane Blast and Forgotten Torch out of standard, Mage will need to rely on other damage spells, and Flame Geyser can fill that role nicely. Also, the fact that it creates a cheap 1 mana elemental that we can use to trigger the bonus effects of other elementals makes it a very good fit into an elemental mage archetype, if such a thing ever exists. Another neutral elemental card that helps with the bonus effect is Firefly, which has a battle cry of placing a 1/2 elemental into your hand. This card is obviously great for the elemental synergy, but it might also be a very good match for Zoo, where it can provide you with 2 cheap minions bundled into one card to flood the board faster. 2 legendary elementals have been revealed so far that benefit from the elemental synergy. The first is the neutral Ozruk, which is a 5/5 taunt for 9 mana, and it gains +5 health for each elemental you played last turn. Blizzard has stated that they have seen this guy grow to 530, but realistically it will probably be a 510 or a 515 on average. Are these good enough stats for 9 mana? Well, we don't have to look too far. Saga the Slitherer is a 5/9 legendary with taunt for 9 mana that has the added benefit of cannot target with spells, and it doesn't see any play. Ozruk will have more health in most cases, but it is weak to spell removal and silence, and thus even weaker than Saga to see competitive play. Stone Sentinel, the Shaman legendary, is a 7 mana 4/4 that summons 2/2/3 taunts if you played an elemental last turn. That is 8/10 worth of stats for 7 mana, which is pretty good, and would be a nice fit in a control type Shaman deck if one exists. Back to Mage. The next card is Arcanologist. This card is absolutely and utterly bonkers. A 2/3 that draws a card, and not any random card but one of a specific type, is insane. Just think of this for a second. Both Captain's Parrot and Novice Engineer were 1/2 for 2 mana back in beta, and both were deemed too powerful and nerfed into 1/1. This card is a 2/3. There is no question that this card is broken, but where does it fit? Is Secret Mage going to be a thing? There are already 4 Mage cards: Cabal Lackey, Cabal Crystal Runner, Medivh's Valet, and Kirin Tor Mage that fit into a Secret Mage deck, and the main problem with that deck was drawing a secret consistently, so Arcanologist might make that deck viable. Even if Secret Mage is still not strong enough, any Mage deck that plays Secrets would love to run Arcanologist. Dinosize is an 8 mana Paladin card that sets a minion's stats to 10/10. It was described by Blizzard as an 8 mana Pyroblast, which was actually the mana cost of Pyroblast in beta before it was nerfed. That description, though, is not very accurate. To play this card, you need at least a minion on the board, and with no minions in play at 8 mana, it is a dead card in your hand. Also, Pyroblast could bypass taunt to hit the face, whereas this has to go through a taunt. Is this good enough to make it into a Paladin deck? We have our doubts just because of the prohibitive mana cost of the spell. Just think about it. Would you rather play a Ragnaros Lightlord or Tyrion for 8 mana, or Dinosize? Maybe it can find a home in some unusual OTK Paladin decks, but for 8 mana we highly doubt it. Sunkeeper Tarim is a 6 mana taunt that transforms all other minions into 3/3s. His effect is like a massive Keeper of Uldum battlecry. The body stats are pretty weak because we already have a 3/8 taunt for 6 mana that sees no play, but what about the effect? The nice thing about Keeper of Uldum was that you could reliably target a minion offensively and defensively, but with Sunkeeper Tarim you have to set the board state in a specific way to get an advantage out of him. Either you have several recruits and your opponent's board is empty, or your opponent has a board full of huge Jade Golems. Against an aggro deck or a Shaman with lots of totems, playing him is actually a buff to the opponent's board. We had another Paladin legendary, Ozruk the Pure, that was more consistent in debuffing the opponent's board, and he saw no play, so it seems really unlikely that Sunkeeper Tarim will be consistent enough to see play. Next is the Priest quest, Awaken the Makers. A quest is a new 1 mana legendary spell that starts in your opening hand, and you can mulligan it away if you wish to do so. When you play it, it will show up where your secrets usually show up, but your opponent can hover over it to see what it is. As you start fulfilling the criteria of the quest, the UI will update the status, and once you fulfill the quest, you will have a massive, possibly game-changing reward. For the Priest quest, Awaken the Makers, you have to summon 7 Death Rattle minions, and you are awarded Amara, Warden of Hope, a 5 mana 8/8 taunt that sets your health to 40. Amara is obviously an insane legendary that is like a Reno on steroids, but how viable is a Death Rattle Priest deck? With the rotation of Sylvanas, the current Death Rattle minions in the game seem weak, and you will need to pack your deck with these subpar minions to trigger the reward. Even with the amazing Amara Warden of Hope reward, it just feels like you will be delaying the inevitable of being outvalued by the much more efficient Jade decks. We'll have to see if there are any counters to Jade decks in the set that will make other control type decks viable. Shadow Visions is a 2 mana spell that allows you to discover a spell in your deck. This card seems really bad because at turn 2 you will spend your whole turn casting a spell just to get another one in your deck, while your opponent builds tempo on the board. If the opponent had a minion played on turn 2, wouldn't it be more efficient to play a 2 mana minion or cast Shadow Word Pain rather than pass the turn by looking for a copy of it in your deck? Crystalline Oracle is a 1/1 that has the death rattle of drawing a card from your opponent's deck. In that sense, it is like a mini Shifting Shade. This card is weird in that its cost is the same as that of Awaken the Makers quest, and it's meant to be played in that deck. So if you play the quest on turn 1, are you supposed to play a 1 mana cost on turn 2? That feels like a weak tempo play, especially if you have already forfeited your turn 1. Wouldn't Loot Hoarder be more suitable as a 2-mana follow-up to the quest? Also, drawing a card from your deck is more reliable than drawing one from your opponent's, especially when you're trying to draw the Death Rattle minions to fulfill your quest. Tortollan Shellraiser, on the other hand, is a really good Death Rattle card for 4 mana, because as we have seen with Bloodhoof Brave, a 2/6 taunt body for 4 mana can see competitive play. Its Death Rattle of +1/+1 is a nice added bonus, but its main utility is as a Death Rattle taunt that will help the Death Rattle Priest deck fulfill the quest while protecting it from aggros. As an additional bonus, it gives you a taunt when you resurrect it with Enzoth, in case you need to protect yourself from lethal after playing the Old God. The next legendary is Rogue's Sherazin Corpse Flower, which goes dormant when it dies, and transforms into a bud that takes a permanent spot on the board until you revive it again by playing 4 cards in a turn. This new mechanic of having a minion or a token take a permanent spot on the board is super exciting, and we will see it again soon in the Warlock quest. Back to the card. A body of 5/3 for 4 mana feels really weak, and without Conceal it can be easily killed by the opponent. Triggering the effect by playing 4 cards in a turn is possible with preps and backstabs, but then you get another 5/3 that can be killed by a 2-mana minion. If it could attack the same turn it is revived, it would have been much stronger because it would be like a minion with repetitive charge, but having to wait a whole turn makes it too weak to be competitive. The Shaman has a new cool AoE spell called Volcano. Volcano is a 5-mana spell that deals 15 damage randomly split among minions with 2 overload. The damage is dealt to all minions, both yours and your opponent's. With Elemental Destruction rotating out of Standard, Volcano is a nice replacement for Control Shamans and will only see play in that archetype. It does not make sense for mid-range Shamans because they usually have a strong board presence. This spell is actually more flexible than Elemental Destruction because it can wipe out a board of small enemy minions as well as a single big threat. It also has one super cool animation that will definitely make our top Hearthstone animations list in the future. The Warlock quest is Lakkari Sacrifice, and it asks you to discard 6 cards to be awarded with Nether Portal. Nether Portal is a 5-mana spell that opens a permanent token on the board that summons 2 3/2 imps every turn. Obviously, the value of summoning imps for the rest of the game is insane, but how easy is it to fulfill the quest? Well, in Sherazin, we already had a discard Warlock deck that was competitive for a while, but in that deck you were trying to minimize the amount of discards. This quest asks you to embrace the discard mechanic and go crazy with it. We already have 2 Darkshire Librarians that can discard 1 card each, 2 Soulfires that can discard 1 card each, and 2 Doomguards that can discard 2 cards each, and we obviously have Deathwing if you want to go crazy with your discards. The problem is that with discarding minions at random, you might end up discarding 2 Doomguards, making it very difficult to achieve the quest. So Blizzard introduced new cards for the discard mechanic. Lakkari Felhound is a 3/8 taunt minion that discards 2 cards. A 3/8 taunt minion for 4 mana is pretty strong and will fit really nicely in the discard quest Warlock deck. Its stats are more defensive than offensive, so we might see the birth of a more mid-range or controlled Disco Lock deck. The second discard mechanic card is the Warlock legendary Clutchmother Zavas. If you discard this card once, you will get a 4/4 for 2 mana, which is insane, with the added benefit of not losing a card from your hand after playing Soulfire or Doomguard. In the worst case scenario, playing a 2/2 for 2 mana is not horrible. We can see this being played in aggro Disco Lock as well as the Quest Disco Lock deck if it's viable, and with the rotation of Dark Peddler, maybe even in a traditional Zoolock deck. Explore Un'Goro is a 2-spell card that replaces your hand with 1-mana Discover cards. This card is obviously a fun card like Renounced Darkness that won't see much competitive action, but will feature some fun Trollden highlights. I've heard some streamers say that this is actually better than Renounced Darkness because you can choose a card out of 3. The problem with the spell and the reason why it is not better than Renounced Darkness is A. Renounced Darkness did not replace all your cards, only your Warlock cards. You can still have Ragnaros in your deck and it won't be replaced. For Explore Un'Goro, it actually replaces all your cards, including your neutral ones, with spells. B. The Discover cards cost 1 mana, so in the process, every card you discover costs 1 more mana. If you discover a Yeti, it is 1 mana for the Discover and then 4 mana for playing the Yeti for a total of 5 mana. We understand why they didn't go with 0 mana Discover spells, because you can cycle through your whole deck if you had Gadgetzan Auctioneer in hand, but still, the 1 extra mana means you're playing 1 more for every card you are discovering. With Renounced Darkness, the cards you replace are actually cheaper. Granted, discovering cards is better than getting random ones, but you will still end up choosing a bunch of random cards that have no synergy with your deck. Golakka Crawler is a godsend answer to pirates. We posted a meme video a few weeks back about Journey to Un'Goro and how Elise will see pirates rampant in Un'Goro Crater because Pirate Warrior has only lost 1 single card in the rotation, and that is Sir Finley. Compare that to losing Reno, and it looked like we were going to have another pirate-infested meta. It seems like Blizzard finally gets it, and the whole success of their quest system, and by extension the expansion, relies on these quests being competitive, which means that the meta needs to slow down. The first answer is Golakka Crawler, which is a great tech card for the current meta. If pirates are strong, playing a 2-mana 3/4 that kills your Bloodsail Cultist or your South Sea Captain is a huge tempo swing that can cripple the deck. I've heard lots of pros saying that a 2/3 that is so specific to a certain archetype is too much of a drawback to see any play. But did they forget that Acidic Swamp Ooze saw play, even with lots of Reno locks, Reno mages, and Dragon Priests on the ladder? Playing a 2/3 or 3/2 is not the end of the world if you're facing a control deck and have a long-term plan, but if you're facing an aggro deck, it can change the face of the game. You can even see recent Reno locks playing Bloodsail Corsairs to further counter the pirates. How bad is a 1-mana 1/2 against a mage? And yet it still sees play. Another aspect to Golakka Crawler is that it has the Beast tag, which is a bonus to hunters because they can buff it with Houndmaster. Some players have said that the pirates can play Golakka Crawler on their patches and get a 3/4 on turn 2, while having a 2/3 and a 1/1 is better for aggro than having a 3/4. Also, that 3/4 is a beast, not a pirate, so it will not get the South Sea Captain's buff or trigger the Bloodsail Cultist's battle cry. Next is Tar Creeper, which is another wonderfully designed defensive card. This card is designed so that it has too weak of an attack to see play in an aggressive deck, but in a defensive deck it is a Senjin for 3 mana. In the height of the mean streets of Gadgetzan meta, Senjin saw play in Frozen's Reno lock in the HTC Winter Playoffs, so we are getting a Senjin for 1 less mana. There are some players that commented that Second Rate Bruiser is a 4/5 and it is for 3 mana. The problem with Second Rate Bruiser was that in many cases you were not able to play him till turn 5, and aggro players could play around him by not playing a 3rd minion. Tar Creeper is much more reliable in that you can always play him on turn 3 and get a 1 mana cheaper Senjin. The last card that we are reviewing is Elise the Trailblazer. Our favorite card is back and she is as good as ever. Her battle cry is to shuffle a 2-mana Un'Goro pack into your deck, and when you play the spell you get 5 Un'Goro random cards into your hand. Blizzard has confirmed that you will always get 1 epic card in the pack and 1 legendary card on average. Legendary quests won't be part of the Un'Goro pack. This card has great value because the body is a solid 5/5 body for 5 mana, but the pack can give you lots of value in the long game. Also, the fact that the pack goes into your deck means that you will fatigue 1 turn later. This card will be a good addition to many late-game control-type decks, but it is yet to be seen if these decks are able to compete with the endless invading Jade armies.